All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Baker. I'm the principal planner for the city of Norwalk. I've been here for about 6 years working for the city. So I started sort of doing the zoning permit stuff at the front counter, and then I've sort of worked my way up to the position that I'm in now. With that, I'll start sharing my screen and presentation. All righty. So the city kicked off a big rezoning process as part of the 2019 Plan of Conservation and Development. One of the goals was to re-look at the zoning in the city and kind of do a comprehensive overhaul of the zoning regulations throughout the city. As part of that, we looked at, so we have a brand new set of proposed zoning regulations as well as a zoning map. So we'll kind of get into those. So we'll start off with the purpose, the intent, and the goals of the zoning regulations. Some big picture items, kind of looking citywide changes. Then we'll look at some more of the Harbor View, Village Creek, Brookside area specific changes, and then go over sort of what the next steps are as part of the process. So the first goal of the new regulations is to modernize our zoning regulations and to make them more user-friendly and align them with our citywide plan. If you look at our zoning regs today, it's pretty much, I don't know how many pages it is, but it's probably like 300 pages of text. It's really hard and complicated for someone who's not familiar with them to go into and read and find out what you can do on your property, sort of like where you can put your house, where you can put your driveway, where you can put a shed. There's multiple places you would have to look in the regs, and there's really nothing to point you to which section you're supposed to go to. Working here for 6 years, it's sort of my job to know the regulations, and sometimes it's hard for me to find where we're supposed to be looking. We had, people who worked for the city for 30 years, and we'd find sections of the regs and they would, it would be a surprise to them that it said that. So sort of the goal is to eliminate that and make everything much more user-friendly for everybody. So as part of that, we are looking to simplify and reduce the number of zones. Currently in Norwalk, you have 31 different zoning districts, which includes 5 different single-family zones. So we're proposing to cut that in half, pretty much going down to 14 zones, and then we'll have some overlays. And an overlay zone is essentially it is an additional sort of regulation on top of the zoning regs. So the East Avenue Village District, for example, the Rowayton Avenue Village District, essentially it has a base zoning underneath it, and then there's additional standards on top as far as sort of like architectural design elements that you have to abide by when you're looking to develop a property. And then what we're hoping is that the regulations are easier to view and makes everything simpler to regulate. So there's going to be a lot of pictures, graphs, charts, things that you can sort of visualize what a setback looks like, where a house can go, all of those sorts of things as part of the regulations. So here's sort of what your zoning map looks like today. The goal of this slide is to kind of show you that there are a lot of zones. That's all 31 of them scattered throughout the city. There's really no real rhyme or reason to how some of the zones got placed. I think you can see sort of on the blow up on your to the right. You can see that you can go from a B residential zone into a C 2-family zone, into a D multifamily zone, and then back into a AA residential zone. So it's sort of scattered all over the place. There's no flow to it. And there's really no kind of discerning factor of why one side of the street is zoned a certain way as compared to the other. So we want to align our zoning districts with sort of the comprehensive plan and the plan of conservation and development. So in the plan of conservation and development, the POCD, which again was just recently adopted in 2019, there's a future land use map, which sort of provides a rough guide for how the city is going to develop throughout the future. And within that, what we're focusing on is concentrating future development near the mass transit centers in the city, like the Sono Station and the East Norwalk train station, as well as Merit 7. Infrastructure, meaning where are major roads, who's served by public water and on sewer, and then where are our jobs. So for example, Norwalk Hospital is a good one of the biggest employers in the city, as well as sort of the Merit 7 office towers. And then what we want to do is develop a form-based hybrid zoning code. So I'll kind of get into what those terms mean as far as what it means for zoning purposes in a couple slides. So here is our sort of where we're focusing development on. So you can see on the map sort of the train stations with some radius drawn around them. You can see the Norwalk Hospital indicated by the heart logo, the West Ave Wall Street area with the little briefcase, which is sort of where jobs and entertainment is located. And then you can see the Merit 7 station at the north end of the city on your map. So those are kind of where we're focusing development on. Again, it is near mass transit, our train stations. It's our major routes and corridors like Route 1 and West Ave Wall Street, and then our job producers. If you hear kids in the background, I'm sorry, it's bath night, so they are screaming. So then another purpose of these changes is to sort of address some of the major land use issues that are confronting the city. So as many of you might know, we are sort of in a housing crisis right now. There's not enough houses in places where people want to be. So we're looking at inventory and choice. The recent census data came out showing that Fairfield County, and specifically the Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport metro area, has one of the lowest inventory for housing in the entire country. As a result of that, home prices have skyrocketed. It's become very hard to afford a new house nowadays. So we're looking at hoping to address that issue, as well as doing that in a way that encourages home ownership, because we recognize that purchasing a home is one of the biggest investments you'll ever make. So we want to make sure that people can have a affordable entry point into a home ownership opportunity in the city of Norwalk. Beyond that, there's some obviously climate change, and Norwalk being a coastal city needs to be very aware of the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. So these regs, there's components in it that address the prevention of clear cutting of lots. There's the allowance for certain improvements to be made to homes that are in flood zones. And then an overall concept of, sort of, if you focus your density near mass transit, you can reduce car trips and hopefully incentivize walking and biking. And as we know, car trips are our largest CO2 producer. So we're hoping to sort of eliminate as many car trips as we can. And then this will hopefully all improve the permitting process. What that means is sometimes a person comes in thinking they can apply for a permit and have everything that they think that complies with the regulations. And unfortunately, there's some reg that they didn't find that creates a problem, or it needs to go to a commission. So what we're hoping is that this whole process can streamline a permitting process for you, a homeowner, for a person looking at doing a development on their property. If you have good regs in place, then you can kind of have an expectation of what development can go on in the city. And then lastly, tackling public versus private responsibilities. So a lot of the times, if an application goes to the commission, there sort of becomes a little bit of a back and forth on how much public amenities we can ask for a developer to include as part of their project. What we're hoping is that with these regs, we can standardize what we expect when a development comes in to say, this is what you must do in order to get an approval from the city. So here's where we'll discuss a hybrid code, which I had mentioned earlier. A lot of towns throughout the country have what it's called Euclidean zoning or traditional zoning. And really what that does is it separates all the zones based on use. It says, here's where you can put your single family homes, here's where you can put your jobs, and here's where you can put your industrial uses. So everything is separated based on use. What a hybrid code does is it takes this more new approach to zoning called form-based, which is more focused on what a building looks like and how it interacts with the area. So it's more paying more attention to making sure a building looks nice and a little bit less of what the use is that goes in that building. That doesn't mean we're going to start permitting or allowing a bunch of uses that we don't want in the city. It just means that we're going to pay a little bit more closer attention to what a building looks like and less so for the commercial areas on sort of the uses that go in them. Meaning if it's retail, restaurant, office, they all kind of do the same thing. They're all commercial uses. So, we don't need to sort of really pick apart the difference between a restaurant space and a retail space. But for the single family zoning areas in the city, those are going to stay with that typical Euclidean zoning for the most part. They're going to say, here's the setbacks. The only things that can go in this area are single family homes and a couple of exceptions for things like parks and churches and things like that. But for the most part, those are sort of staying with your typical zoning approach. And then again, adding lots of graphics, tables, things like that, so you can kind of visualize and more easily understand what you can do in the zone that your property is in. So here's what form-based zoning kind of pulls. It's where it comes from. So it's sort of a national model in the US. And what they do is they base it on these transects. So in each transect, they kind of tell you what a typical sort of density is going to be like. So what you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen is, for the most part, you just need to worry about the numbers here, is a 1, which is a natural, untouched open space area. Then you kind of move into the next step of density, which is a rural setting. So the number 2, what we would think with that is maybe one house on 10 acres, very agricultural, again, very rural. And then what we do is we move into number 3, which is where you start to get into Norwalk. Norwalk is it starts out suburban around the fringes on the edges of the city, a lot of single family zoning, 1 acre lots. So that's kind of what you start to get into when you hit Norwalk. Then as you move closer to the center of the city, more towards Sono, more towards Wall Street, you get to a CD4. So what the 4 is generally getting at is you start to see some more mixed use buildings, lower scale than what you see in South Norwalk, but you start to see some small commercial uses. So you start to kind of get this gradual increase in density as you move closer and closer to the center of your city. And then lastly, you get to the number 5, which in our case is the, again, South Norwalk near the Sono train station, and then up through the West Ave Wall Street corridor. They do include for this special districts. Special districts are sort of your areas that don't fall into any of these categories. They are sort of your industrial areas, marine commercial areas. Norwalk has some islands, so the islands would fall into that sort of stuff that doesn't fit the typical mold that the transects go into. So again, the numbers are the most important part here. And then the CD, what that stands for us is community district. That's kind of just the name, the nomenclature that we took to designate our zones as. So this is a look, if you haven't looked at the regs yet, they're all posted on the planning and zoning website, but this is sort of what they start to look like. So you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, it says CD3S. So again, CD stands for community district. The 3 is that suburban transect, and then S in this case stands for small lot. What small lot means to us is you need 100 feet of frontage in order to have a lot. But again, this is a single family zone. This makes up a good amount of the area that you guys are in Village Creek, Harbor View, and Brookside. So I figured that this was an important slide to show you guys sort of what the regulations are proposed to look like. Moving on, this is another zone in Norwalk. This is when you start to get into more of the commercial areas. So this is 4W. So the transect 4, so you start to get to that mixed use. You start to see multifamily with commercial uses. Sort of what the kind of the the setbacks are for a lot, coverage, max heights, things like that. So you kind of get an idea of where a building can go and what it's supposed to look like. This is new to the regs and something that we think is really important. It's not groundbreaking, but I think when it comes to where we're coming from now with our existing regs, this is a really cool thing for the regs. So this is a use table. And what it does is at the top of your screen, it lists all of the zones that we have. And then going down this table, it goes on for multiple pages. It lists every single use that's allowed in the city or not allowed in the city. And it tells you based on that zone, if it's not permitted, if it's permitted, if it's permitted but has limitations, meaning, yeah, you can do it, but there's some additional restrictions on top of that use, or if it needs a special permit. So you have to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission in order to seek an approval. And again, it's broken down. So this is just the residential section. There's a commercial section. There's an industrial section. It's all broken down based on sort of the overarching use group and then sort of more specific uses within that group. Sort of building on that form-based typology, what it does is it lists in the regs different types of building types. So for example, here you can see a townhouse. So it's going to say, here's what a townhouse is, here's what a townhouse is supposed to look like, and then here are the districts where a townhouse is allowed. So again, once you get to those mixed use multifamily areas where you'll start to see some townhouses, and then the regs sort of regulate what kind of materials that you need to use to build one, what kind of frontage it needs to have, meaning can it have a stoop entry? Can it have steps that go up to it? Can it have a lower floor that you can access via the frontage of the property? So it breaks down what type of materials, the window spacing and all that sort of stuff. So you can sort of start to predict what a development might look like in an area zone that allows that type of building. Here's just some blow-ups. So they go into more detail. They included houses, although again, single family houses are not subject to this stuff. So if you're building a single family house or you want to put an addition on your house, you don't need to worry about us saying, oh, well, you need to use a certain, you need to use wood or you need to use brick. We're not going to get into that level of detail. We sort of left the single family areas alone in that regard. And then here's where you start to see, or we'll start to tell you sort of what a building should look like. Again, so townhouses on the left, and then this is a small multifamily on the right. So we're going to tell you how many units are in it. We're going to tell you sort of the frontage type again. So porch, stoop, forecourt, and all of these are defined in the regs to tell you sort of what they are. And so what that does is it provides some predictability again on what you can expect these type of developments to look like. So moving into the big picture changes. So this is again citywide changes. What we did is really little change to what is existing, the AAA zones in the city. Those are mostly along the outskirts of the city again. So it's like West Norwalk, Cranberry, Wilson Point. These are areas which are largely not on public water or sewer. They're usually septic and well. So we didn't really want to go into and start touching those when they're not really conducive for any sort of intense development going on. Then moving on into the other single family zones that we have in the city. So there's the AA zone and the A zone, and then as well as some B areas, we combined into a zone called the CD3S. Again, a single family zone. It is the smaller lot, so meaning you just need 100 feet of frontage. And the reason why those zones were chosen to be combined or consolidated was they share a lot of characteristics with one another already. In an AA and an A zone today, if you wanted to make a new lot, you still need 100 feet of frontage for both of them. The setbacks are essentially the exact same. with some minor differences for the side and the rear. And really the biggest difference is the minimum lot size. So for a AA lot, you need half an acre, and an A, you need about a quarter of an acre. The new regs propose to totally get rid of minimum lot sizes because essentially a minimum lot size makes you purchase land that you might not need in order to fit a house on it. And then just that the frontages being the same means a lot of these lots today are built to the minimum required, meaning that if you needed 100 feet of frontage, your lot probably has 100 feet of frontage. So we do not expect there to be a bunch of subdivisions coming in as a result of that. We think the lots as is are largely what will be there going forward. One of the more substantive changes was the consolidation of the B residence zone and the C residence zone into the CD3. So the big difference between the B residence zone and the C residence zone is mostly just that B residence is single family only and the C residence zone allows for 2 families. So where areas got consolidated from the B and the C together, that means that areas formerly B can now have 2 family houses constructed. So what we're sort of hoping with this is it allows some more housing opportunity for people going forward, meaning you're not just restricted to building a single family house. You can consider putting a second unit in your property. And we don't see that as an increase in density, basically because ADUs are allowed in all single family zones today. So you can already do a second unit on your property. The 2 family houses are subject to the form-based requirements. So we can sort of tell you what a 2 family house looks like. And then we're hoping that it increases some home ownership opportunities, meaning if you have a single family house and an ADU, it is the owner of the property owns both. But if you do a 2 family house, perhaps one person can own 1 unit and another person can own the other. And it provides, again, that more affordable entry point into a home ownership opportunity to build some equity in a home. And then we consolidated a lot of the downtown districts all into what we're calling the CD5. So again, 5 based on that transect that we looked at earlier. So this ranges from the South Norwalk train station all the way up to the West Ave Wall Street area where Route 1 sort of crosses over. I think it's at Cross Street. The idea is that currently there are 6 different zones within that area. And they're all trying to accomplish the same thing. They allow for taller buildings, lots of increased amount of density, mixed use buildings. So they're all sort of saying the same thing. So we said, let's just put them all in one zone. That way you can kind of sort of have more of a consistent development pattern in that specific area of the city. So here's sort of what that looks like. On the left is the proposed zoning, and then on the right is the existing zoning. So you can see on the right, there's all these different Reed Putnam areas. There's the Washington Street Design District, the South Norwalk Business District, the Sono Station Design District, and the Central Business District. A lot of different zones, again, all trying to do the same thing. So we said, let's put them all into the CD5. It's just one zone that pretty much is the exact same as that area. Then what we did is your Route 1 corridor up through Main Ave. Those are all essentially, there's 2 zones. There's the business 1 and the business 2. We said, let's put them together. They then become what's called the CD4C. Figure that there's really no difference between the 2 zones today, maybe some minor uses that separate the difference between the 2. But sort of what we're hoping in that area is you sort of move away from this development pattern of large parking lots, strip malls, sort of towards a more, visually and aesthetically a better looking corridor throughout, and more consistency among the buildings, where the parking's located, the signage, all those sorts of things that kind of make driving down Route 1 not the most aesthetically pleasing drive in the world. And then what we did was we proposed to consolidate some of your smaller multifamily zones together. So there is the D residence zone, which is a multifamily zone, and then the neighborhood business zone. So those are both smaller multifamily zones that allow for the same sort of density and the same type of building. So we said, let's put those together. So what that means for the D-residence zone is previously that just allowed for multifamily buildings. Now you can start to do some smaller commercial uses. And hoping is that you can kind of build like a small corner store, a little office on the first floor, so, those sorts of things that allow people now to be able to start to walk to destinations rather than having to drive to the Route 1 corridor to do all of your shopping or to go get your hair cut. Sort of those places can sort of start to pop up a little bit further into the city. And again, that's all going to be restricted based on size. So we're not trying to have CVS open off of, more of a side street. We're hoping that these are more of your local businesses, people who live in the building and then work on the first floor. That's kind of the idea behind that. Then we created a civic zone. The idea of the civic zone is to give the city some more flexibility when they come in with projects, more specific to things like parks, sort of things that are good things for the city and sometimes have to take longer because they need to go to Planning and Zoning Commission to seek an approval. They're already well vetted projects from the start. They go through different common council committees. So there's already a lot of eyes on them. So we really don't think that planning and zoning needs to be an additional set on top of that. And then our waterfront areas. So you'll notice on the map, if you've taken a look, that some of our waterfront areas are listed as TBD. So to be determined. What that means is right now the city is doing some waterfront studies, and we're not sure how those are going to come out at this point. We're hoping relatively soon we'll know, but that's kind of what we're hoping will kind of guide the type of development we see along our waterfront. So sort of like we're kind of looking at, you have industrial waterfront ideas, you have public access waterfront ideas. So we're kind of trying to see what the study recommends. We take that to Common Council for them to take a look, and then they'll sort of make a decision on adopting that as part of our POCD, and then we can base our zoning on that. And this is where we'll start to get into some of the really the nitty-gritty stuff in the regs. So we move away from regulating based on height and move towards regulating based on the number of stories. So with form-based codes, the idea is that you sort of get to see or can visualize what a building would look like based on the number of stories that it is. You can't associate, if someone says this is a 50-foot high building, you can't get an idea of what a 50-foot high building looks like. But if someone were to tell you this is a 4-story building or a 5-story building, you can picture how big that would look. There's caps on how big a story can be. So it's not like you get to just make a building as tall as you want. We're going to tell you how tall a story can be. And that way it's sort of, when we looked at it, the amount of height, there's really no difference between the existing regs in terms of how tall a building can be in a specific zone versus going towards this model. So we were really cognizant of that and making sure that the heights were generally consistent going forward. We moved on from no more minimum lot size into frontage only. And we based a lot of this on that we don't think that requiring a minimum lot size is needed, because you sort of, when you're walking or driving down a street, you get an idea of what the neighborhood you're in is like based on the proximity of the houses to the street and how the proximity of the houses to each other. So you can kind of get a pattern of development that you'll see just from walking and driving down the street. You don't visualize the depth of a lot. So you can't tell that a lot has an acre of land. You can just tell that the house is 40 feet back and it's about 80 feet from another house. So you kind of you picture that and you can see that, but you can't tell how deep their lot is. So that's sort of the impetus behind removing minimum lot size. And again, we looked at for the frontage purposes, the frontages are consistent with what is required today. So if you needed 50 feet today for a lot, you'll need 50 feet for frontage going forward. So we don't think you're going to see a lot of subdivisions coming in. We don't think it's going to lead to that. We looked at that pretty closely, and it's fairly consistent for how the form-based code will regulate that. Michelle, I see your hand up. I I'll hold on to that until the end. I think I'm almost done, so I'll call on you when we get to the Q&A part. We're adding in regulating impervious surface coverage, which is really good because right now we don't do that. We tell you how much of the lot you can cover with a building, but we don't tell you that you can't pave over your entire lot. So just by adding this regulation in to say you can only cover this much of your lot with impervious surface, we're hoping that that helps with rainwater absorption and a lot of climate benefits that come with that, sort of keeping rainwater on a lot and not having it shed off onto your neighbor's properties. For the FAR stands for floor to area ratio. It pretty much limits how much floor area within a building you can have on a lot based on the size of the lot. We're proposing not to require that anymore. There are so many requirements right now that limit what a building, how big a building can be. There's height limitations, density limitations, parking requirements. There's, if I didn't say it already, height limitations. So there's a lot of things that really shape what a building will look like. So we don't think FAR is needed as an additional requirement on top of that. Grading and vegetation and tree removal. So again, I think as I mentioned earlier, we do not, we can't stop you right now from clear cutting your entire lot. These regs will actually do that. So they're going to say if you're proposing to remove a certain amount of vegetation and trees on a lot that exceeds a certain square footage, you need to come in and get approvals from some sort of body, whether it's staff, whether it's the commission, Planning and Zoning Commission. You need to provide or seek a permit and get an approval for that. Grading is important because right now there's nothing in the regs that stops you from essentially mounding up your property to make it taller, and then building your house on top of that, which will make the building appear taller, actually will be taller, and then all of that runoff is going to just flow onto your neighbor's property. These regulations actually will limit how much grade you can add to your property, and it'll regulate the slope that you can actually grade your property to. So what that's going to prevent is, again, that sheet flow of water from your neighbor's property onto yours. It's gonna hopefully stop that from happening. Regulation of lighting. This is private lighting, so lighting that goes on buildings. There's regulations on that to hopefully sort of prevent any sort of negative effects from those bright lights that are on, whether it's a residential property or commercial property, from shining in your windows at night, making it hard to sleep. So we have regulations that limit that. Some sustainability measures for larger projects. So these are things like putting solar panels on and green roofs and things like that for some of the larger projects. We are continuing to look at sustainability measures and looking at really how far we can push those requirements. So that's definitely something that we're still looking at as part of this process too. Revisions to flood regs. This is very important for a lot of you. Right now, Norwalk, as I've been told, has some of the strictest flood regulations in Connecticut. So if you own a house and it is not flood compliant, meaning it's not, the first floor isn't raised to the base flood elevation +1, we limit how much work you can do to your house to 50% of the value of just the structure. So what that means is once you hit that 50%, we say you can't get any more permits until you raise your house to be flood compliant, which obviously for a lot of folks is very difficult to do. So what we've added in is a sort of reset period. So every 10 years, we're proposing that that value will reset. And in those 10 years, you can do, I believe it was 25% of the value of the structure. So that allows you to do a lot of necessary repairs to your house. If you need a new roof, it's going to let you put the new roof on your house, or new siding or windows. It's going to let you do that work in that 10-year period. It's not meant for you to put a large addition on your house and not make it flood compliant. We still want, the purpose is, again, the flood regs is to encourage homes to be made flood compliant. And then lastly, we want to increase public notification. One of the big things that we hear is a building will get built and a lot of people will say, well, I didn't even know that was proposed. They don't notice it until all of a sudden a building gets knocked down or there's a foundation going in. So we're going to increase public notification. That includes putting an actual physical sign on a property where there's a project being proposed. And then what we're doing is also, it's not in there yet, because we're kicking around a distance, is requiring for certain applications a radius from that property that person would have to notify neighbors. I think right now the distance that we're sitting on is 250 feet. We looked at Darien, Wilton, New Canaan, and Westport and what their distances were. And I think we're 250 is more than most of them. So we think that's a good number, especially because Norwalk has some smaller lots. So 250 feet really becomes, notifies quite a few people about a project. All right, so these are more of the specific changes for your area. The Harbor View and Village Creek area are proposed to go into the CD3S zone, which is that single family zone. So again, you are currently B residential today, which is a single family lot or single family zoning with a minimum lot size of 6,250 feet and 50 feet of frontage. So this is going to keep you in that single family zone. And one of the big reasons is when we were looking at sort of what zones or what areas to get consolidated into certain zones, we're looking at, again, those distances from mass transit, infrastructure, and jobs. And when you get to Harbor View and Village, you really start away from,
Okay.
you really start to get
Don't worry about it.
mass transit areas. It becomes a considerable distance where you're probably driving to the train station if you're going to the train station. So that was a big determining factor. Again, ADUs are still permitted in the zone, so you can still have your single family house and put a detached or an attached ADU up. And then, as I just mentioned, there's those big updates to the flood regulations about work that can be done to your property. Brookside, this one is a little bit more interesting since we recently talked with 6th Taxing District and heard back from a lot of the folks there in the Devil's Garden area. So this was an area where we proposed to go from the B residential into the CD3, which is the 2-family area. The Brookside area historically was C residential zone going back to when zoning was first adopted in Norwalk in 1929. So there's quite a few 2-family houses already there. Even some in the B zone, there's a good amount because it used to be a 2-family zone. So that's sort of the why we chose to keep it in or move it into the CD3, which again allows for the 2-family houses. And it is more proximal to things like the South Norwalk train station in the Route 1 area. So with our last meeting with the 6th Taxing District folks, we took a hard look at Devil's Garden, the Devil's Garden area, which again was proposed to go into that CD3, the 2-family. From what I suspect is that's going to get pulled out and go back into the CD3S. And sort of what we'll look at is whether Highland Avenue becomes sort of the dividing line between the CD3 and the CD3S. So that's just an update on that for any folks who might be concerned about that or on the call. So this is a comparison. The proposed zoning is on the left and the existing zoning is on the right. So what you'll see is, so you have Harbor View, which is in the CD3S, single family zone, Village Creek as well. Then as you move up, you get to Shorefront Park. Shorefront Park was included as part of the CD3, again, based on you have existing 2-family here today, existing 2-family here today, and existing 2-family here today, and you're more proximal to the South Norwalk train station. Devil's Garden, again, as I mentioned, this is likely to get moved from the CD3 into the CD3S, since it is a little bit further away from sort of the things we mentioned as why we sort of where we're focusing most of our development in the city. And you'll see a lot of 2-family zoning already in existence today in the area. So we think it makes sense that those all kind of get merged into one unified zone. So here's our next steps. So we're already into May, so we're continuing to do these meetings with whoever will have us, trying to spread the word as much as we can about the zoning updates. And again, this is all proposed. None of this is adopted. This is not set in stone. This is, planning and zoning staff's recommendation for the changes. The Planning and Zoning Commission is the ultimate decision maker. So they'll take our recommendations, they'll take all of the feedback they get from the public, and they'll sort of weigh all of those changes. And kind of they'll be the ones who make the decisions. So we're going to continue doing these types of meetings. June 21st and June 28th, we're looking at holding a couple of public hearings with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those will not be to adopt any changes. Those will just be to get more public comments so that you can say what you like, what you hate, what you think should change directly to the Planning and Zoning Commission at those meetings. July and August, we'll sort of kick around all of that feedback we got. We're not going to make any decisions because we understand everybody's probably away on vacation at that point. So that's really just a time to kind of go over all of that feedback that we've gotten, what changes need to get implemented, do all that kind of stuff. And then what we're hoping is by the end of September and early October, we can hopefully start to do some adoption hearings. So actually look at adopting changes at that point. And then we'll set the effective date of all of the changes, hopefully for January 1, 2024. I think that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to show you guys where you can go on the city website to see where everything is. Just going to share my screen. Get back into the Zoom. Okay, so if you go to norwalkct.gov, it'll bring you to the landing page for the city. And what you'll go to, move this out of the way. As you'll go to city government, you'll hover over that. You can go down to planning and zoning. From there, on the left-hand column here in this blue, you can go to zoning regulations update, and you'll click that link. And that will bring you to the landing page for all of the changes. So that includes a fillable form where you can click this. It brings you right into here. You can say if you're a Norwalk resident, whether you're a property owner, a renter, a business owner, kind of just fill in some basic information. It's all anonymous. And then you can kind of type your comments. This goes to Steve Kleppen. He's the Director of Planning and Zoning, and all of this gets forwarded directly to the Planning and Zoning Commission for them to review. Back to that page that we were on earlier. This has some quick sheets, sort of what were kind of like FAQs on questions that we kind of envisioned that we would get from originally proposing the changes. Here's a breakdown of all the draft regulations broken down by article, and then you can also download the complete draft. Downloading the complete thing is nice when you use like a Control F and you can search certain terms. But then the sort of the breakdown of articles is easier if you're just looking for specific things. You don't want to look at 300 pages of zoning regulations. And then at the bottom you can see the two maps. So there's a PDF map and then there's an interactive map. What the interactive map does is it will bring you to get rid of that disclaimer. So you can type in an address in the city. You just have to make sure you're in Norwalk. It pulls from a global database, so it will grab, you see New Canaan on here. And it will bring you to a property, and what you can do with that property is you can click it. You're not really clicking the property, you're clicking on the zone, but it will tell you the proposed zone. And then there's a couple links on here that will bring you to the regulations specific to that zone, and then the use table, sort of all of the uses that are allowed in that zone. And then you can click on this little caret at the top right of this, and it'll tell you the existing zone. So you can compare what the proposed zone is versus the existing zone and kind of get an idea of what changes might be happening to you. And again, if you do have specific questions, I think you can reach out to myself and Steve, and you can we can talk you through any sort of property specific changes and how that will impact you. So, that's another option. And I think that's it on my end. Welcome to kick off Q&A if anyone has any questions, concerns. I know, Michelle, you have your hand up if you wanted to go.
Hi, Brian. Nice to see you again. I feel like we've seen each other quite a bit these past few weeks. I thank you very much for addressing the concerns of the neighborhood. That's great news for us, and we appreciate your listening to our concerns. Question for you. Well, two other comments that I have for you. One is, I'm very concerned about removing the lot size. And I say that because, as a family, we tend to do most of our entertaining or eating together as a family outside, birthday parties, everything in the back of our house, and not in our front yard. And that's where it becomes nice to have a large backyard where you have a little bit of privacy and you don't have somebody peeking over the fence, kind of a thing. And I think that's a nice draw to Norwalk. So removing the lot size is a bit of a concern because we're already on more or less postage stamps in this particular area. So that's a bit of a concern, not so much here, but I think in more of the bigger areas, just something for you to consider, having a little bit of privacy and being able to do your thing in your backyard is definitely a draw. And then my other concern is why we're trying to go down to 14 zones. When I looked at the areas around us in other cities, Westport has 34 with 12 residential, Fairfield has 16 and 8 of those are residential, Hartford has over 30, Stamford has 39, Bridgeport has 24. And I agree with simplifying, but I don't know if we've simplified it maybe a little bit too much. And those are my comments.
Okay. Yeah, so for lot size, that's something when we talked with the West Norwalk Neighborhood Association, they brought that up. Something that we're still looking at. When it comes to a lot, so you'll still have all of your minimum setbacks that you have to abide by. So if you need to have a 20-foot rear yard setback, that's still going to be required regardless of sort of what your lot size is. So all of those setbacks are still in place, meaning a building has to go in a specific location on your property. It's really just that, you can fit a single family house on a 1 acre lot relatively easy, and still have quite a substantial backyard. And really the only reason why you have an acre is because zoning tells you that you have to have an acre. You could probably get by pretty well with half an acre, but again, this is not, you're not required to get rid of any of your land. If you own that land, it's all yours. So there's nothing that's going to sort of change that. So that's sort of like what we're looking at it as. And again, it's sort of that form-based. You walk down a street, you can sort of tell what the neighborhood is like based on where the structures are located on the property. And then for simplifying, I don't think we didn't target like 14 zones. It sort of just ended up being that way just based on there are just so many commercial zones in Norwalk that really, again, are all trying to accomplish the same thing in the city. So the Route 1, which is 2 separate zones, is really, whether the north side or the south side, it's pretty much the exact same on both sides. So we don't think you need sort of 2 separate zones that way. For the residential portion, again, that's a lot of it is just based on the similarities in those existing zones today. So again, the AAA zone, we really didn't touch because that one is sort of on its own in terms of how big the lots are. The A and the AA, for all setbacks are essentially the same. There's a 10-foot difference in a side and a rear setback, but the minimum frontage you need at the street is the exact same. So the lots are very similar. If you're going down an A versus a AA neighborhood, you probably can't tell the difference. So that's sort of just the idea behind it. But again, all these comments are going to get reviewed by the commission. So thank you. Anyone else?
Ryan, I don't know how to raise my hand
It's
with
all
the
right.
technology, but my name is Marie Sutton and I live in Harborview. And I had a question on the substantial improvement definition and also your comments earlier on the new flood regulations.
Okay.
Because I've read the draft regulation differently and than you explained. And in fact, some folks here have actually talked to people in P&Z and we've gotten a different story.
Okay.
So my question relates to, again, the amount allowed for the improvements for a non-FIA compliant home.
Mhm.
And the way that I read the draft, it says that the allowable amount is only 25% of the assessed value of the structure 10 years ago, not the current market value.
Right. So I think what has to happen is we have to have a starting off point for everybody. So with that, so we take 10 years ago when we start 25% from then, and then 10 years from that point is when it will reset again from the 25% of, I believe it would be the updated market value. But Marie, if you can send your comments into me, I wasn't the person who kind of came up with those, but I want to make sure I get you an accurate answer as far as kind of how it'll work with sort of the resets for the values.
Yeah, the issue is that a lot of the homes in Harborview that need updates, like a new kitchen, a new bathroom, a new deck, etc. The amounts that we're coming up with for allowable budgets is ridiculously low. I mean, we're getting numbers like 18,000, 25,000, which you can't do anything with.
Yeah, I'll get you half a bathroom, right?
Right. And so, I think people would really love to raise their homes if needed. And some of the homes, frankly, aren't needed. They weren't damaged during Sandy, so they don't even need to be raised, at least not now. But to raise a house here is $150,000, $200,000. And people just don't have the type of money to raise their houses. And the regulation written the way it is right now is keeping them from being able to do even basic maintenance, repairing windows, putting in a new bathroom, the way that it's currently stated.
Okay.
It's not even just raising the house. It's where do you go in the 6 months that it takes to raise the house, right? So it's a ridiculous budget that is being defined in these regulations right now.
Gotcha. Okay. So what?
And I just want to add that the surrounding towns, at least a couple that we've researched, they don't do this. They do what you stated earlier, which is it's based on 50% of the current market value. And the look back for work that's been done recently only goes back a few years.
Okay.
In fact,
let me take a look. Because I thought and this was my discussions, I'll have to look at this further. I thought what we were going to do is similar, but do a 25% number instead of the 50%, but I will definitely check to see.
It is 25%, but it's going assessment way back of the value of the structure, which some of our structures were only valued at, $100,000 or less.
I know
10
right
years
now
ago.
what we do is we go all the way back to when the building first became non-flood compliant, which for a lot of people was 78, I believe, when the flood zone were added. So
and even FEMA's definition of substantial improvement is 50%, is based on 50% of the current assessed value of the structure.
Okay.
So I just don't know why Norwalk is being so stringent on this.
Yeah, we'll take a look. I know the goal is we do want to achieve flood compliance with a lot of the structures, but we want that happy medium where you can do basic necessity repairs to your house, updates. And then when it's not intended to, for full on additions, but yeah, well, we'll take a look at that. And if you can send your comments in, Marie, it sounds like you have some experience in this, so that'd be helpful.
I do. Thank you.
Yep. Jason?
Hi. My name's Jason Little. I'm a resident of Harborview. and I agree with Marie. I think Norwalk's flood zoning regulations are very strict, and they're not. They don't match up with what the NFIP program requires. You know, they allow 50%, and it's not a 10-year look back. It's more of a a rolling clock. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about today. I have a lot of comments about the regulations, but I want to keep it brief and let other people talk. My biggest concern is the design standards. Certainly for the single family housing, it's been said the regulations allow us to do more or less what we want. But there's two really design standards that I find troubling. The first is that the facade has to have a base, a middle, and a top. Those terms are capitalized, but they're not defined anywhere in the zone regs. And I'm really concerned that we are dictating a certain kind of style to a house. Certainly modern architecture doesn't match that criteria of a base, middle, and top. And I was out on the water the other day, and I'm looking at all the nice houses along the waterfront, and several of them do not have a base, middle, and top on the waterfront. They have giant windows looking out, and it just seems odd to me that a zoning regulation, which really ought to be about land use and bulk. I'm a proponent of Euclidean geometry, Euclidean zoning. I'm just really concerned about those design standards. They get far more stringent in the C zones and the D zones, where they talk about window alignment, which is also capitalized but not defined. That windows have to align up and down, but what if one window is bigger? Does it align on the left? Does it align on the right? Is it aligned in the center? Windows have to be rectangular, so we can't have a circular window ever. There's just all of these criteria that I'm really concerned that homeowners going to want to do something, and then the planning departments would say, oh, you can't do this, you have to do that, and there's going to be big arguments. And then there's going to be this third-party consultant that that's written in the regs as well, that for these kind of design decisions, the city is going to engage a third-party consultant, which then the applicant has to pay for. And it just seems like it's going to go down this rabbit hole, and there's going to be a lot of challenges early on. And so anyway, that's my spiel on design standards. I have a lot more to say about it, but I'll hold off on that. What I also want to point out is
Jason, so I don't forget.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so single family houses are not subject to any sort of design standards. So I point noted on the base, middle, and cap. We were just talking about this in the office the other day, especially in Village Creek, where you have a specific architectural style. So kind of what we're thinking is, a base, middle, cap ends up being, your base ends up being the first floor, middle becomes the second floor, and then your cap becomes your roof. So flat roofs are allowed in the regs, but point noted, and definitely we'll take a look at making sure that that is clearly at least defined, and then so that's in the regs. For the third-party design review, that is really only subject to specific zones, so mostly the village districts. So for example, we have the EVTZ, which is the East Norwalk Village TOD zone along East Ave by the East Norwalk train station. So if you come in with a project there, it is subject to an architectural peer review. So we hire an outside peer architect, and he reviews the proposed architecture of the building. So that's only specific to those village districts. That doesn't apply to single family houses, the zones that are kind of outside of that. And then window alignment, we can look at that too, and making sure that everything sort of makes sense, and there's a variety of things that are allowed.
No, I appreciate that answer. Thank you. I just worry that, with this predictable results of form-based zoning, that we are not going to have those kind of unpredictable results where you have amazing architecture and everything's going to be kind of bland, but expected and boring. I happen to appreciate when there's an ugly building next to a nice looking building. I think that variety actually helps the urban landscape. But that's another discussion. I want to point out one other thing about lot size. And in this sort of desire to reduce the number of zoning districts, I think we're missing out on Harborview and maybe a few other neighborhoods where we have very narrow lots. And now we're in a zoning district where 100 feet is the minimum lot width. I'm on a 40-foot wide lot, And I think other lots might be 50 feet where they were conforming. So I'm curious to know, what's the process going to be for developing on a non-conforming lot? And what are we going to expect as a homeowner going into the planning and zoning? Do we need an architect? Do we have this third-party consultant? And I'm also wondering, has there been an analysis of how many lots have become non-conforming, whereas in the previous regulations, or the current regulations rather, they were conforming?
Yeah, we can take a look at that. We're constantly doing more and more analysis as questions are coming in, sort of based on all these questions that we're getting. So say you right now you only need 50 feet of frontage, or for your example, you have 40 feet of frontage and you're moving into a zone which requires 100. That will have pretty much no impacts on your property, meaning that one thing that we noted, and I want to make sure gets added, at this point will get added, is if your lot existed prior to the adoption of these regulations, that means you can abide by the setbacks that existed prior. So your setbacks and everything will remain the exact same. But as far as, so please, when you submit more comments, and as part of this, that'll get included. I'm talking with Steve, my boss, all the time, and that's definitely something that we're planning on adding in. So it's just making sure that it does get added in. But if you have a non-conforming lot, that really means very little for what you can develop on your lot. The setbacks are the exact same, meaning that you have rights to build a single family house on your property, that you could put an addition on your house just as anybody else could. It really doesn't impact you in that way. But again, I think that sort of out clause that says if your lot existed, you can use these setbacks instead is really the catch-all.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'll take a closer look at that.
Okay. I'm not sure if it's codified in there, so it's just making sure that gets codified.
Sure. One comment would be there's probably been a lot of evolving changes to the proposed regulations. It'd be really helpful to share some of that with the public. So as you're fixing these problems, like we don't keep hearing the same complaints.
That's a good point. So what we're planning on is taking all of this feedback that we're getting, and we're going to compile it into like one big document, and then get that posted with staff responses. So that way the commission can parse through everything and see what people are saying, seeing what staff is saying in response to that. The only thing I can't say with like the map right now is because so like the map going out was staff's proposed map. So I can't change that until like the commission says change it. We're kind of like on a holding pattern based on that, but my assumption is that changes are going to, especially for like the Devil's Garden area for in specific, that's going to probably be asked to get changed. So once those requests are made, that's when sort of those map changes will come out. But yeah, thank you.
All right, good. Thank you very much, Brian.
Yeah. Anybody else? Questions, concerns? If not, again, we're still really early in this process. You can email Steve Kleppin at skleppin at norwalkct.gov, or myself, B. Baker, at norwalkct.gov with any questions, comments, concerns. Anything you guys say to us gets forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission, so they can read your comments and concerns and kind of get a feel for what people are saying. You can use that online form. That again goes directly to the commission. Again, it's a lot. The new regs it's a lot to look at, so it's a lot to take in and sort of evaluate. Take your time. Again, June 21st is when we're targeting our first public hearing for you guys to state any concerns and questions and all of that with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then, again, from there, we'll hold many public hearings and then hopefully look at actually adopting changes starting in the fall.
If nobody has comments, I'll continue speaking.
Go ahead, Jason.
Let's talk about floor to floor heights, building height.
Sure.
It almost seems like it was a typo or something, but to regulate floor to ceiling height really doesn't fix a maximum building height.
Yeah, my assumption is that, and so the consultant who proposed it, and I think part of it is, we would never have expected somebody to like build like 5 feet of void space in between. I would still say that you probably can't based on how the regulations are listed, but I think again, in fairness, like just saying floor to ceiling, floor to floor is a much more clearer way to do it. So I'm assuming that change is going to be implemented as part of that.
Yeah, I looked at Bridgeport, I looked at Hartford, they all regulate floor to floor. And then out in Denver, they have a maximum building height to go along with their maximum stories. So I figure that'll get updated. I just wanted to point it out. And then the other issue is impervious surface coverage,
Yeah.
lot coverage, more or less.
Yeah.
Big change in the zoning where now we're just talking about impervious surface coverage. And in our district, we get for a small lot, 35%. And I would assume that anything that's pre-existing and non-conforming, if I had a giant driveway, or to take it to the extreme, if my lot was covered in asphalt, I could ultimately build a house right out to the setback lines. That's clearly not the intention of the regulations, but it seems like one of those weird things that you could get unexpected results. But anyway, if you have to park in the rear, now you have to have a long driveway to go back to the rear. That driveway is impervious, and that's going to restrict the amount of building that you can actually put on the lot. Other towns like Bridgeport and Hartford, they call out, what do they have? They have impervious surface, additional semi-pervious surface. They distinguish between these different elements, ultimately so that the building can still be, it's gonna be 20 or 30%, but then you have some allocation for your driveway, and if you have to do a semi-pervious driveway, then you do that. I think it's just something that y'all should look at.
Sure. Yeah, and and I think it's good to, again, the more specific, probably the better. I think the idea was, here's an impervious surface number. If you get up close to it and like you have your asphalt driveway, maybe you say, all right, I'm going to make my driveway out of a pervious or something that doesn't count as impervious surface. And that way we're sort of getting at the same thing, but
right, it's just not defined. The only thing that's defined is
right.
impervious.
Can which towns did you just list, Jason?
Bridgeport and Hartford.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You trying to speak, Janice and Kevin, or are you all set? If not, I'd say thanks to everybody for coming again. Please continue to submit comments through the city's website and through to Steve and myself, and all of that will go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and hope that you guys can attend the public hearings that are coming.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks everybody. Thanks for coming.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.